piece right here?
Yeah, you tell me about it.
Well, he wanted me to tell him what it was before we started shooting this, but I wouldn't do it. I know he's intelligent, so we're just carrying on. But Tim, that is a handmade piece for a flathead Ford to cut the dome up into the cylinder head on the aluminum heads.
Seriously.
And think about today, the machinery they've got to do that. They can punch it in, and it's CNC, and look how they did it.
Well, you know, when we were at the Hall of Fame, remember all those tools and everything that we thought were so archaic that we looked at?
Yep.
But they did the job, didn't they?
Well, this is made out of a file, hand file, and they've ground it with the proper edge on each side of it, which is reversed, and put it into a pilot and hook that into a drill press and secure the head down on the base of the drill press and just pull it down. Then Mike can see how deep it is, or put an indicator up on it and see how far they go down into it. But that's what did it, you know.
That's amazing, but to look back, it's like you and I were talking earlier, the way the technology was in the 30s and 40s. You know, how long did it really take NASCAR and engineers everywhere to get back to where they were then? I mean, realistically, when you compare all the technology they have today to what the boys were doing in the 30s and the 40s, they had it together then. Now they've got machines and computers that do it all.
Yeah, they wanted parity. They want parity today, and look, the Gen 6 is with us now. And I can see why they want it that way, but the only time they ever had parity was back in the 40s, early 50s, when you bought stock cars, and there was not that many speed equipment shops around. And when they got a car, it's pretty much like everybody else's. No engine speed equipment, and later on they started making the cylinder heads, and all that stuff was developed out in California for El Mirage and Bonneville, and the guys started bringing it back here. I was talking to Joe Roof's Speed Shop some years ago, and when they were making speed equipment out on the West Coast, they wondered what were the guys back here on the East Coast doing with all of it, you know. They were making some cylinder heads, casting them out of aluminum, and grinding some cams. And of course, all that stuff was made for Bonneville and El Mirage out there. And see, in California, they made their speed runs back here. We was going in circles, and they figured we was probably dizzy and a little crazy back here. But yeah, the guys made their stuff basically like that other piece, and then that Gus Pageant gave me both of these pieces, but that's your fine top dead center on a flathead Ford. And
now, how does it work? Well,
this is bolt to your deck. You run your head bolts down into it with some washers to stack on top of it to make sure it's secure to the block. And then you run this down probably 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch, and it's a little rusty now, you can't hardly turn it. And the piston come up and hit it and stop, and you take a reading on your degree wheel. And then you turn it back the other way, the engine rotation, until it hit again. And then you take a reading on your degree wheel and divide it by 2, and the center of that would be top dead center. So this little piece is like that, and all that stuff was handmade. And as far as coming through the years, how stuff evolved, so did the rule book. You know, NASCAR wanting parity, and as I mentioned, as we talked a while ago, these cars, you had a lot of parity starting out. But as they started making stuff, the grin cams and heads and things started picking up. Well, anybody could still get them. But I think back in those days, if you stop and think about it, if you had a decent car, I think the driver, this is just my opinion, was probably 70, 75, maybe 80% of your success.
There was that much parity in the cars?
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah, I think it was.
Well, they were all, 3940 Fords, right?
But today, with the ground effects and the cars and what NASCAR's trying to do, I think it's more car today than it is driver.
Well, I agree. I mean, it's what do they call them, steering wheel holders?
Yeah.
Now, not taking anything away from those guys, because I certainly can't go at Talladega and run in a 40-car pack that far apart at 200 miles an hour, but it's the It's what you're saying. It's like we look around your shop and we see some pictures of the old races where they've got these cars down with the right rear tire digging, and you don't see that anymore. It's all so symmetrically balanced with computer setups for this and that.
Yeah. When they showed up to race with these cars, they didn't have 2 or 3 engineers with them and a pit boss and things like that. Racing's involved. It's what it is. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't roll back the clock.
That's right.
And it's where we're at. Even the tracks, there's much difference. And the reason I think that they built what we call the modern era tracks is to accommodate the sponsorship with the suites, so they can rent these suites out and they can party and bring their customers or would-be customers to wine and dine them. And you didn't think about that back in the 40s and early 50s. It just didn't happen. But not take anything away from most of these guys today. I think a lot of them could probably drive these cars and be successful. I think there's a handful that wouldn't get out of an electric chair to get in one of these cars if they,
I agree.
No fuel cell and no roll bars, driving suits, air conditioning. Didn't know what it was back then.
No, none of it. I mean,
we went to school, didn't have air conditioning.
Yeah, we did too. And we didn't have, the only place we could go to get air conditioning when I was growing up was a movie theater.
Right.
That was all.
I don't even remember air conditioning in movie theater.
We did. We had air conditioning. We had 3 of them in Columbia.
What would happen today if your air conditioning went out at school?
They'd let school out.
Let school out.
They do. And it's just like what we had this week in Columbia when they had the rolling blackouts for the heavy usage with that cold we had. They were starting schools 2 hours later and letting them out an hour earlier.
You get a good hard rain today, they stop, don't they?
That's right. That's right.
Now, they got sponsorship today, and the racing's so expensive, you can't race without sponsorship.
Right.
If you race out of your rear pocket, what happens?
You don't last long.
You don't last long. The sponsorship of the 40s and early 50s, I guess that had a lot to do with it. You ever seen a bottle like that?
No, but I'm guessing they probably put moonshine in that, right?
But look at the top.
I love it, darn. Presto what?
I don't know.
The only thing I know that Presto made now is spaghetti sauce.
But the thing of it is, it's a glass center. And if you buy, I don't believe you can buy that today, can you?
I've never seen it.
I don't want to drop it.
I have never seen one, in fact, until just now.
But this, I know that's what my daddy used. And a few times he come back with it leaking and broken where they'd shot slugs in through the trunk. And, I know you can put 125 gallons in the back of one of them.
How many bottles? That's quart bottle.
Took, but
I'm not that good at math.
You can figure it out.
Can't figure that out.
I guess they inventoried him up in Martinsville that time.
Yeah, they'd do that.
Well, you know what that is.
No, but I agree the label of this one. We're not supposed to say this on the air, I'm assuming. Moonshiners Uplift Society Incorporated.
Well, you know where that, I'm going to tell you where that comes from.
I know what it says, but...
Yeah, well, that's what it is.
Seriously.
Ed Samples, years ago.
Oh, yeah.
You know who that was?
Yep.
He had this made and labeled and give to his friends. See that, folks? That's what that is. I guess they had a lot more fun back in those days than they do today, don't you?
Well, speaking of that, do you think there's a lot of fun in racing now?
Well,
I mean, then, of course, but I'm talking about on the cup level, the nationwide level, and doesn't the fun sort of run its way out as you leave the trucks? I mean, you got the K&N and these other series that seem still to be fun. When I go to watch them, they still seem to be fun.
Pressure, but many of these teams got the performance contracts.
Oh yeah.
And it's like somebody's watching you all the time. You're on camera all the time, and they got to watch their P's and Q's. You don't have any more suitcase Jakes around.
Yeah.
We all respect and remember him. And many others were very colorful, and today that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
But talking to you, I know you're big on history, and we're approaching a time that we're going to lose all that history, and some of it's going to be. There's some good books, Riding with the Devil, the Gold Thunder by Rex White.
That is a great book. Yes.
Tim Flock, the story on Tim
That's
Flock.
another good one.
There's a few of them out there I enjoy reading, and they're dead on as far as I'm concerned. And I do realize that what happened in Dawsonville and Atlanta is a little bit different from here. But then again, it isn't. The players, they love racing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think many of them did it for the money because it wasn't much.
Wasn't any money in it then.
Yeah, it wasn't money. It was a challenge, and you got to remember the Ford 1932 first V8 hadn't been around too long.
Right.
And before that, you know, what were they racing? And nothing. But stripped down roasters and stuff like that. Then you had the Indy cars, and boy, were they crude. And then the midgets. I know my daddy, his interest was watching the midgets, and then later on they built that big mile track over there across from the Clover Hill Farm Dairy, and that's how he got into it. And they didn't tell it for a long time what they were building, and then he saw, you know, the surveyors out there and discovered what it was, and they let the Beatty brothers that were building that track, they let him come over there and practice on it, you know, before they ever opened the track to anybody. Mm-hmm. But in talking to you, I know your interest is preserving stock car racing as it was, and Racers Reunion with Jeff. Y'all really started a great program, and it's opened up a lot of eyes to other people that's become aware of early day stock car racing, and y'all were probably one of the pioneers in it, and getting people's interest involved to where they'd want to preserve this history. But why did you do it?
Well, actually, Jeff Gilder started that in honoring Paul Lewis that had helped Jeff get his racing career underway. And Paul Lewis had set up this Racers Reunion deal like 20 years ago to bring the old drivers from Eastern Tennessee together once or twice a year. So Jeff, coming back from visiting Paul one time, decided, well, I'm enough into computers. This was about 2008, 2007. He was enough into computers, he decided to set up a website and call it Racers Reunion. So I got a call one night in March. He started it right at the end of January. And I got a call in March from a friend of mine and said, Tim, you have got to check out this website, because he knew I was very into history of the racing too. So I went and checked it out, and I joined that night. I was like number 74 to sign up. And I just started, you know, every day I'm on the computer typing this and whatever I could remember about the racing. And then Jeff had a Christmas party at the end of that first year. And the computer program on which he ran Racers Reunion had rating levels for how much you contributed and what you did to the race site. Well, I was the number one. I was on there more than anybody else, number one, and the computer named me legend, put me in legend status. So Jeff thought that was funny. So he said, okay, well, you're going to be the legend, you're going to be the icon. So thus we started talking. So I wound up, and I've got pictures to prove this, I was wearing cowboy hats and sunglasses in 1964.
Okay.
So I've got that. I've got pictures of it on our website. So we went with the cowboy hat and the sunglasses and the boots, which everybody knows belongs to Richard Petty, but I had to give Richard my license to let him do it. Joke, joke. But, you know, that was the deal, because I'm recognizable as an icon for the website when I go out. And as much as I love racing, I also love people. I just absolutely am a people person and love to be around them. So when you mix my love for racing and my love for people, and you get around folks like you and all the rest of the people, I mean, it is, I can't even say a dream come true, because 10 years ago I never dreamed I would be sitting at a table next to Bill Blair signing autographs at Stots for Tots.
Well, now that wasn't a big deal, but
no, that is a really big deal for me.
You sit next to the king.
Well, I mean, you know, that's a big deal too.
But would you agree that what Richard Petty did for stock car racing in his time is sort of like what Arnold Palmer did for golf in his time?
Right, it would be, but you know, it's yes, you are right. That's what Richard Petty did for racing, but you've got to go all the way back to the Tim Flotts and the Fonnie Flotts and the Bill Blairs and the Jimmy Lou Allens and people like Dink Widenhouse. It is because of Dink Widenhouse that I became such a race fan, because my Uncle Bobby, who took me in September of 1952 when I was 5, he took me every week to Columbia Speedway and to Newberry and wherever, because he was a Dink Widenhouse fan. So I got to go to all these races because my Uncle Bobby wanted to see Dink race.
Well, I agree, yeah.
And then Lee Petty was his Grand National guy. So the very first race that Richard Petty ever drove was at Columbia Speedway, and we were there that night. So I walked up after the race and met Richard and got his autograph and all that good stuff. And I told Bobby on the way home, I said, you know, I'm going to start pulling for Richard, just being the little brat that I was going to be, to say I'm going to pull for somebody besides Lee, who you pull for.
Well, what I observed, I agree with you. I just happened to be around when the Fonny flock was racing.
Mm-hmm.
And Fonny, I compare him somewhat to Richard Petty. I think Fonny was probably stock car racing's first ambassador.
I would
that's
agree.
What I'm saying. He did so many things that would excite the crowd, you know, and they wanted more of Fonny.
Mm-hmm.
He was a show.
He was.
The stuff that he would do. And after the race, Fonny would get out of that car and take a shop towel or a T-shirt and wipe his face. See, he'd run dirt tracks, and he'd wipe all that off his face, and you'd see his big old smile and his eyes light up, and he'd go to talking to people, and next thing you know, there'd be a crowd around him. Now, there'd be a crowd around Buddy Schumann, Red Byron, but ultimately the big crowd was around Fonny because he put you on show. And I don't know if he signed autographs back then or not, but he sure did. He'd stay there and talk as long as you want to talk. And I think that's the thing, the point I wanted to make about Richard. I knew his daddy. I don't remember his daddy ever signing autographs or talking like
he
Richard did, but or nobody. I know Jim Pascal, as soon as he got out of the car, he'd run get in his car and go home. He won't talk to nobody. And that's just the way Jim was. I mean, he liked people, but he wasn't hurried to get home. But Richard stayed there until the last person left the track. And from that, made Richard Petty. To me, I think fans appreciated somebody that would talk to them like that, and on their level. Richard never was a hi-hat guy.
And I was one of those fans because it's Richard. Well, I'll tell you, I aggravated him his entire career. From his first night he drove through Stops for Tots. I'm the aggravating little guy that's always hanging around. But you're right, he was there, and he helped me really feel close to racing, like I don't think a fan has that ability to do these days, because we could go in the pits after any race and find any of most of them, really. But it was always Richard Petty, and I have got a ton of pictures in my lair, my little home office, of Richard sitting on the wall after the Firecracker 400 with salt just coming through his uniform, and he's signing autographs. I've sat with him at Darlington on the wall beside him 2.5 hours after the race, still signing autographs, and he finished 12th, 13th, 15th, you know. And that was the kind of thing, and I've alluded to this before in some of the programs I've done on Racers Reunion. I felt really connected to the sport then because I could always talk to these drivers. I could always talk, even at the short tracks. Of course, every week on Thursday at Columbia, if you were there every week, you got to know them by name. They knew you on site, knew you by name. But with the Grand National drivers, because, thanks to my Uncle Bobby, I got to go to so many races. We started going to Darlington in '57 at spring race, never missed another one. We were at Charlotte from the first one in June of '60. We started going to Atlanta in '63. You know, all these tracks, we were there. We figured out ways to get in the pits, get in the garage area. I mean, I was doing all these things because I didn't know I was not supposed to do them. So I just walked in. You know, if there was a crowd walking in the garage area, I was smart enough to get in the middle of all of them and just go right in. I went in more garage areas at 15 and 16 walking in with the Petty crew than most people can get in today with their garage passes.
And those guys, I mean, like Richard, you don't see him for 5, 10, 20 years, and when you do see him, he'll start talking to you just like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't forget.
Exactly.
Little Bud Moore, I mean, there's so many of them, and Rex White, Dink Widenhouse, Marvin Panch. Once they have met you, I don't care when it was, they don't forget you.
They don't.
And
you mentioned Rex White, and that's a prime example of the good, the very, very best there is of stock car racing, because Rex was a champion once in 1960. He won in Atlanta, I think was his one big track race,
Right.
but he was there from the 50s up through the 60s, and I think into the 70s, right?
And he's still a champion of stock car racing.
Yeah, he is.
I mean, just a wonderful guy, wonderful stories, and he promotes racing until this day. One of the best ambassadors ever.
He does.
So many of them are like that, and it's just, it's great to be involved in a sport such as stock car racing.
I absolutely 100% agree.
Getting back down to Racers Union, you can, the web page, you can go on and the page and pull up interviews from years ago that you explain how all that works.
You're talking to the most computer illiterate guy on the planet,
right. I'm that way, but that's the reason I ask.
Jeff and his crew down there, that used to be his son Dustin too, would help before Dustin's son came along. But they put all this in the archival system of a computer, and it's all in some hard drive, or Todd, you probably know, but puts it in there, and you can pull it up by keywords. And there are interviews like, there's one on there that I did with Richard Petty a couple of years ago, that you just put in, I think it's either under my name or Richard's name, it pulls up. It's like a 32-minute interview we did at his museum. There's also another interview, if you go far enough back in the archives, that I did with Richard in December 1992, right after he retired. We did them up at his shop in Level Cross. So you can go, those I pulled up. Pictures, there's over 100,000, I think, is the latest count, 100,000 photographs, going all the way back to these cars on the side of your trailer here, this car behind us, and even farther back than that.
Well, I think I know the answer to this question, but I'd like you to explain your feelings and why we need to preserve early day stock car racing.
Well, because I think, obviously they would not be at the point that they are today, at the pinnacle of the sport that they are today, making millions like Carl Edwards and Kyle Busch and Kurt Busch and Denny Hamlin and all that group, if it had not been for these guys that started it all way back then. And sure, it's redneck, and that's to be decided. Is redneck a good term, or is that a bad term? I guess that depends on the connotation you use it in. But the redneck boys running moonshine. Well, you can look at that and say, well, it was illegal activity. Well, in reality, maybe. But how were these guys of the Depression area supporting their families and trying to make their money? And I think the whole part now is such a romantically involved issue between the revenuers and the people running the shine that now we kind of look at it as, hey, that's a good thing. That was a good thing.
Well, it's about like if you got caught or hauling liquor, it was a badge of honor.
It was then, yeah.
But, it did play a big part in stock car racing.
It did.
And without it, I feel like the Dawsonville area, what would racing be like in Atlanta and thereabouts if it were not for the trippers, as they call it down here?
Well, I doubt they would have even had it in Dawsonville and around, and I don't even know about up here. I think the boys in North Carolina seem to be a lot more competitive. Well, I'll be in trouble with Georgia if I say this. The people in Georgia got in stock car racing because of the moonshine. I think the people in North Carolina would have eventually gotten into it, I don't care what, just because of the competitive edge they want to have with their cars. Sure, the moonshine played a part in it, but the very fact that the stock car racing headquarters is based in Charlotte, Mooresville area, when in reality, if you think about it, it should be in Daytona, because that's where NASCAR started. That's where they were running stock cars on the beach. That's where Big Bill France owned everything. So it really should have been there, but no, it's in Charlotte and Mooresville. So that tells me that the people in North Carolina, all these guys in North Carolina, and look at the history books of all the drivers from this state, North Carolina, that really promoted it, that started it, that gave their lifeblood in several cases.
Would you believe sometime in about 48, 950, there were more stock car drivers out of High Point, North Carolina than any other city?
I would not doubt that for a minute.
Sure was.
I've never checked that particular statistic, but I would not doubt it.
Atlanta that group down there likes to take credit for starting stock car racing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I don't believe they did. I think it started simultaneously up and down from Delaware to Florida.
I would totally agree with that, Bill.
Skip
Totally.
Hersey and Bill Snowden down in Florida. You go down to Georgia, Dawsonville, Ed Samples and Red Bolt and all of them there. And then you come to South Carolina, you had Cotton Owens and Joe Eubanks and Bud Moore. You come to Charlotte, you had Buddy Schumann, Buck Baker. Buck Baker, one of the greatest ever, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then you come up Greensboro High Point, you had Madidi and Jim Pascal and Pap White. And then you're going up to Richmond, you had Joe Weatherly and those guys up there. And then going up into Delaware, Johnny Garback and Pepper Cunningham and those guys, Wally Campbell. And their deal was up there actually, when we talk about strictly stock car racing, the first strictly stock car race, June 1949, well, they already had the division up there they called strictly stock. Really, they did, and the cars had to be stock. Where did that start? I've heard that Will Bruton, that was his idea, and Bill France beat him to it and did it in his own backyard. But those guys were doing it up there. You can go to old programs and advertisements, and you'll see it. They were doing it back in early, probably 47, 48 that I'm aware of, but I'm not sure. And Bill France, yeah, he lived in Daytona, but the bulk of what he did was in the Carolinas and Georgia. We know he received an awful lot of help out of Atlanta, Dawsonville area. Also, Wilkesboro, there's a guy up there that put a lot of effort into helping Bill France. But anyway, your interest in saving the history of stock car racing, you've been a leader in that front, and I appreciate what you've done.
Thank you for that. That means
you've got others aware of what you're doing, and people like myself have come on board to support that effort, and others as well. I think that some lady selling videos of interviewing some of these early day guys and telling tales, and myself and Todd Morris, we're trying to just record. We're not offering anything for sale, we're putting it on Facebook if you want to watch it. But we feel like it's important too, and certainly what you and Jeff Gilder do is just super.
Well, thank you very much, but all that credit goes to Jeff. I'm just the one that gets all the joy of being out and doing everything that I get. I like today.
But he's not here to defend
Yeah,
himself,
I know, but this is the kind of deal today. When you asked me the first time to come up here, it was like, wow, these are things that when I first started going to races in the 50s and 60s, I wanted to drive. And I eventually did get to drive in 69 and 73. But it was like I never made it anywhere. I never won a race. I got more second places than Harry Gant ever dreamed of. But I never was good as a race driver, never was it with any of that.
Is it true that you run over the pace car one time?
I drove a pace car one time.
Oh,
David Pearson bumped into the back of it. And the little Rambler dealer, they were running a late model sportsman race, 200 lapper at Columbia. And they got me, this was 75, I think, to drive the pace car. And the local Rambler dealer, or whatever it was, American Motors, brought a 75 Matador out for the pace car, and they had me drive it. It had the yellow flags on the back. Well, Bobby Allison and David Pearson were battling it out. The caution flag came out, so I go out on the track. The guy that was riding with me, Pearson, pulls up beside passenger side and wants a light for a cigarette. So we push the cigarette lighter in to pass it back. He passes it back to us. We put it in. So the next caution flag that comes out, I'm out on the track again, and all of a sudden, wham! I look in the mirror, and Pearson is right back there bumping the back, and I can just imagine this guy with the American Motors dealership thinking, but luckily it just made a couple of marks on the chrome bumper. They had chrome bumpers back then, remember?
Cigarette lighter lit up for him.
No, we got it lit up for him. But, those were good days. But I think the fact that my life has always revolved around it, thanks to my Uncle Bobby, who passed away this past October. And he always saw that I was going to races until I started driving myself, like in 65. He was always taking me, he and his wife and my cousin Debbie, and we'd go everywhere. Everywhere they raced, in places like Newberry and Sumter and Columbia, and come up to Wilkesboro and Gaffney and Anderson, all those tracks, Greenville, Pickens, Spartanburg. he was always taking me to races, and that was all I really knew. And when I got to high school, and it was, you either played football, you played baseball, or you played basketball, and I did none of that. So I was kind of a little outcast. Well, it took me about 5 or 6 weeks to start letting the word out, hey, I'm a stock car fan, and I started getting a group of guys together. And then we had the only high school newspaper in the state that came out every month that had a story on stock car racing in that I wrote. But we had a high school newspaper that we were writing stock car stories. But it always meant a lot to me because that was my life. That was what I wanted to do. That's what I enjoyed. That's what I knew about. That's what I wanted to learn about. And going back a story, when my uncle first started taking me to races, my mother would tell me, my father would always say, I would not go across the street to see a stock car race if they paid me to come. And so my mother followed that. And she would say to me, going to church every Sunday, don't tell people you go to stock car races. So I didn't. Then in 1963, the Chrysler Plymouth dealership sat right here on Main Street, and the Winn-Dixie store where my mother and daddy shop was right inside the parking lot. And they always came to shop on Thursday for groceries. So I saw them pull in. So I asked Richard, will you walk over here and meet my parents? And so he was there doing a public appearance, 1963. So he walked over and met, boy, my mother immediately fell in love with Richard Petty. Thought there was nothing, he was just a kid then, of course. So they agreed to go to Columbia Speedway that night, and from then on, you couldn't keep her away. And by 1973, they had bought a used motorhome, and we were taking that motorhome everywhere.
Racing fans then.
Racing fans then. And she just, until the day she died, she went in a coma, October 31st.
What year was this now?
That's the day she died, or the year she became a race fan was 63.
Okay.
And in 1998, whenever she had been in a coma, October 31st, and she came out of the coma just for Thanksgiving Day. I mean, bam, woke up Thanksgiving Day, she just popped up out of this coma. And we all went down. The first thing she asked me was who won the championship, because that meant something to her. So that's how far her life had progressed in what was that, 35 years, that she loved racing that much. And a lot of that had to do with the attention that Richard Petty paid to her all the time, but the excitement of all the races that we got to go to. But, you know, that was back in the days when she was going and first started going. It's exactly what we're talking about, is remembering what made the sport what it is today, or what really gave it the foundation to allow it to become what it has become today.
And now we realize the importance of it and what's taking place. When I was a youngster, I had no idea what the future was going to be.
All right.
And I don't think these guys did either. They just did something they loved, not knowing that they were making history. And then when Racers Reunion started, you and Jeff, I just thinking, you know, I didn't realize what had taken place, but when I grew up, I had two kinds of heroes, and that was the cowboys and the race car drivers. I remember shaking Lash LaRue's hand. He came down to High Point, and he came to see us at the service station down there. My daddy had a pure oil service station, and he liked stock car racing. He loved it. He was a race fan, and he had his bull whip. He was cracking. My dad put a cigarette in his mouth, and he'd take it right off of that bull whip. When I shook his hand, I didn't wash my hand for 2 days at least.
Yeah.
Didn't do it. That was my hero. But I didn't realize how much my daddy was my hero. I can see it now, and I can see it a few years ago when y'all started your deal down yonder at Racers Reunion. But Buck Baker was a big hero of mine.
Certainly worthy.
Bonnie Flock, Bob Flock, Tim Flock, Red Byron. And I think those guys respected one another tremendously, really. And when I figured out in school, when I failed the 3rd grade, it was on account of racing. I went to school first thing Monday morning. I'd tell a teacher who won the race and how my daddy finished, you know. And see, I didn't live far from school. I could walk to school, and he could crank a car up over there, and you could hear it at the schoolhouse. And with the windows open, we didn't have air conditioning back then, you know. But those guys, I didn't know how much I admired them. And truly, you look at it now, and I looked up to them. And so, in talking to Todd and Gene Hobby and Gary Lou Allen and Bill Magnum and and Mike Sykes, we just decided, well, heck, some of these guys are never going to be in the NASCAR Hall of Fame or different Halls of Fame, but they all played a big, big part in early day stock car racing. They made a tremendous contribution to stock car racing, and it was the pillar that they were laying, the foundation. They didn't know it, but you can see it now. So we just got together and said, heck, let's honor all these guys. There's no politics involved. We're going to call them, we tried to think of a name, but still the best one was our racing heroes.
And that's a great one, because that is who they are.
And so we're going to take in a certificate, which we had made for their contribution, our racing heroes. We're going to put their name on it, and if they're not still living, then we're going to give it to the families and keep a record of it. And eventually, when the Hillsborough Group, historical group in Hillsborough, get their museum, we'll keep it there one day. So that's what we're going to do, and I appreciate you people helping us.
Well, you know, Bill, that's a very admirable thing, and I am 100% behind it, because as you alluded to a moment ago, there are all of a sudden all these people coming out of the woodwork want to capitalize on racing history.
Right on.
And some of them are doing it in ways that, in my opinion, are not flattering to the way it was, like we talked about. Sure, we were rednecks.
Really. You can spot it in a heartbeat that they know nothing about what happened early days.
That's right.
They know maybe what somebody had told them. Now, unfortunately, when people like you and me and Gary and some of us is gone, we can't defend these guys. But maybe through our efforts, it'll be there for future generations to know how it was.
Right, and I think more so than defending them, we just need to put out what really happened and let each little individual that wants to look at what you and we all are doing compared to what some of these other things are putting out. I mean, it is perfectly all right with me to use comedy to get laughs in any kind of way. But when you have to do it as a disrespect to somebody that we hold in our hearts closely and dearly, and it's a disrespect, and you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
You know, it's the kind of thing that's not fair, because they are not here to defend themselves. And it's people like you and me and other people that were there and we saw it, you more so than me, because you are older.
Yeah.
You know, but we saw it, we lived it, we were a part of all of it, and we know what it was like. And those are the kind of memories I would like to put on the website and put in what you're doing in our Racing Heroes, where it's out there to see, like the historic Speedway group you're talking about.
So what about the sacrifices these guys
The sacrifices they made,
their life.
Their life in a lot of cases. You know?
Their livelihood in many cases, their family. They made a tremendous contribution.
They did.
And there's nothing comical about it. It was serious business.
It was very serious business, and I think a lot of that's overlooked in a lot of the sites on the web, and a lot of the people that write the books. There are a lot of good books, and you've talked about Driving with the Devil and Rex White's Gold Thunder. There are a lot of good books that tell it like it is, tell it like it was. The ones that I hate to see come along, and there are a lot of these too, are the ones that come along and tell it like they would rather it had happened, or they would rather it be, because it's more entertaining, it's going to draw more of today's generation. Therefore, the bucks to come in from selling the video or selling the book.
Yeah. Well, when I say serious business, I met my daddy as well as Rex White and Panch and all these guys. They had worked day and night for a week to get to the race. And when they got to the race, it's like, well, man, I'm here, I'm going to enjoy it today. And they enjoyed it and raced hard.
That's right.
But it was serious business during that week, because the deal back then, if you got outrun, you went home and you worked trying to figure out a way to beat that guy next week. I mean, that was what your motive was. It was, I guess, over here in High Point, and had that High Point Museum expo on early days stock car racing here in the Piedmont. they phrased the term when racing was racing. And
good term.
To me, it was serious business, but it's a lot of fun doing it. You know what I mean? Well, Tim, thanks a bunch, man.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate being up here.
I enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you for coming up.
My pleasure. Loved it. Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed it.
An old Ford running on a red dirt road. The stars are bright and the moon is low. Revenue man coming up behind. Bet he thinks he's gonna catch me with this load of moonshine. But I cut the lights and mashed the gas.